Hi everyone, welcome to today's session on why do we sell watermelons, leading projects with honesty. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathleen Moorhead. I'm the founder of Paton Consulting, and I help move people and projects forward. I like to say that I have a soft approach. I have a background in social work, so I try to help people get things done without hurting anybody along the way. So, what we're going to talk about today is honesty when it comes to managing projects, whether you're a project team leader or whether you are a project manager or a leader who's looking for information from others related to projects. There's a saying in project management, and it's called the watermelon effect. And what that means is that we are selling something that is green on the outside, aka our status reports are green. But if we were to look closer on the inside, in other words, slicing open that watermelon, there's actually some red going on. And when we talk about projects, red means something's not going as planned. So how do we know if we are selling watermelons or if we are being sold watermelons? Well, there's some critical red flags that can happen. And we say that silence is not a green light. No news does not mean good news. So when we're getting weekly reports that are constantly marked green, that very well could mean that it's a red flag. They're marking it green, but that might be too good to be true. There's no risks listed, or the risks are extremely low. Stakeholder updates that avoid specific details and that are vague. And team members who rarely ask questions or who were vocal and now are very quiet. That's a red flag. If they're unable to share the information that they want to share, that could be a telltale sign that something is not going correctly. So think of it this way. When you ask a friend, a coworker, a significant other, how are you? And they say, I'm fine. But inside, you know that they're not fine. That could be telling you something. So if we transition this thinking to projects and why are people saying, I'm fine, the project is fine when it's not, there's some reasons behind why people say I'm fine when they're really not fine. The first one is called the mom effect, which is people don't want to share bad news. They want to avoid trouble or they just want to avoid conflict. The next is organizational silence. And this is when employees feel that speaking up about problems is actually going to be harming or damaging their career, so they'd rather just remain silent. The third is a low psychological safety. So if team members don't feel safe admitting that there's errors or asking questions or pointing out risks without fear of being blamed or laughed at, they're going to likely hide those problems. The next is interesting. It's called pluralistic ignorance. And this is when, picture yourself in a classroom back when you were in high school or in college, and the professor says, does anybody have any questions? And you do have a question, but you don't see anybody else raise their hand. So you don't ask the question because you feel that everybody else knows what's going on, and you're the only one that doesn't know what's going on. And that happens in projects when we have a feeling that everybody else's part of the project is moving okay and that we're the only one that might be struggling with something. We tend to tighten up and we tend to not ask the questions that we need to ask or raise the issues that we feel need to be raised. The next is unclear processes, and we'll talk about this in a moment. That's when people don't know what the protocol is if something is wrong with the project. They don't know what the escalation procedures are. They don't know how to raise a red flag. They don't know who to contact. And the last is optimism bias. And this is the glass is half full, right? These are just bumps in the road. Things are going to get better. This too shall pass. And it's the natural hope that issues will resolve themselves. So if you can relate yourself into one of these boxes or many of these boxes, think about the folks that you're working with. They're falling into some of these boxes as well when they're thinking about the problems that might be occurring on the project that they're a part of or could be managing. So what happens is when there's this quiet presence, there's actually things that are brewing inside, right? So the first is that there's visible symptoms. There's surface level indicators that something might be amiss, as we talked about in the beginning. All status reports are always green, no risks are discussed. Mum's the word, nobody's really communicating, asking questions, sharing their thoughts. And then there's maybe minor incidents that happen and they're isolated. Maybe it's a one-off, a missed deadline, or conflict between team members, but you resolve it and you move on. So these are just small little things. You manage them and you move forward. Third is that there's unreported problems. So there's issues known to team members, but they're not escalated. So for example, John was supposed to finish one of his tasks by Friday. He didn't finish his task by Friday, which meant that Carla couldn't start her task on Monday. Carla didn't want to rat John out because she knows that John has a lot going on. But then that just starts to build and build, right? So there's issues that are happening inside of the team that maybe only a couple of people know about. It's not even that the project manager might not know about it or the leadership team. It might just be happening between a couple of team members. And then there's these cascading effects, right? So there are unaddressed problems that start to impact other areas of that project. So that John and Carla incident where John missed his deadline and then Carla couldn't work on hers. And now somebody, a stakeholder, asks for an update and now Carla's kind of frozen because she can't give an update because she didn't have the information, right? So you can kind of see the pattern where these things start to snowball. And then this is where they become escalated risks, where minor concerns snowball into significant threats to the project's success. So again, silence is not a green light. We have to dig a little bit deeper and find out exactly what is going on. So how do we do that? Your role as a leader. Here are just some things that will make a huge difference in managing your projects and or if you're a project sponsor, asking for updates on your projects. The first is to prioritize risk discussions. It's highly suggested that on your status meetings and on your project team meetings, stakeholder meetings, that there's always an agenda item for a risk discussion. And that could be about the risks that have been discussed about before and providing an update on where those risks are at. They might be bringing new risks to the table. They might be identifying risks that occurred and how they were mitigated or addressed. Whatever it is, but just having that space, that placeholder in the conversation to say that risk is a part of projects. They have to be discussed, they have to be addressed, and it's part of moving the project forward. It's not we stop everything because there is a risk. It's just a continued conversation. The next is change how you ask for a status. So many times in project status reporting, we provide what's called a RAG, right? Red, amber, and green, red, yellow, and green. But if we change that to ask for more objective statuses about facts and metrics related to how far are we behind schedule? How far ahead of schedule are we? How much money have we spent? How much money did we say we were going to spend? And ask for the confidence level of the likelihood of meeting the next milestone, right? So use a numeric on a scale of 1 to 10, Clara, how confident are you that we're going to meet that November 15th deadline? And if somebody says 10, they're 100% confident versus somebody saying a 6. Okay, well, tell me a little bit more about that 6. What's going on? Some people are going to have a much easier time applying some type of metric, some type of numeric analysis or assessment of the situation than they are going to be to find the actual words to say there's things going on that we need to talk about. So give people that option, and you might find that people become more transparent. The next is making bad news safe to share. Make it normal to share both the wins and the losses, right? Parenting, The kids, I would talk to them about the highs of their day and the lows of their day. If you incorporate that into the conversation, that will create an environment where people feel more comfortable to share and they know that that's going to be part of the conversation. So again, it's not going to be this one-off, but it will be part of the conversation. Incorporate check-ins. So when we talk about check-ins, check-ins are different than status meetings, right? A status meeting is where you're pulling the project manager, maybe the whole team together, and you want a status on things. A check-in is, I'm checking in with you. I just want to see how things are going. There's no hidden agenda. I'm just having a conversation with you because I care about you and I care about the project, and I just want to get a pulse on how things are actually going. Create the escalation protocols. That's the last box on the left. Set clear metrics for when issues truly need escalation, right? So we don't need somebody reporting, there's a storm that's coming and it's, predicted to happen in 2 months. But we do need somebody to tell us that there's information that's going to be critical, that's likely actually going to happen. But define what those metrics are. Set some boundaries that if there's a variance of plus or minus 10%, plus or minus 15% from the schedule, from the budget, and use whatever you can to set those boundaries and communicate those boundaries. And then you have to make sure that everybody knows about what those boundaries are and what the protocol is for communicating those boundaries. And the last thing I just have up here, just because I think this is just an easy one, what's one thing that's keeping you up at night related to the project? Throw that into your conversations so that you give people a place to respond, and so that it's more of a conversation. It's not a called into the principal's office and we need to talk about something kind of conversation. So your role as a team member. So we just talked about your role as a leader. This is your role as a team member. And your role as a team member is to speak up early, the see something, say something concept. And don't wait for issues to become crises. Report concerns as soon as you identify them. And maybe the protocol is that you're having a conversation about a risk with a team member, right? So maybe that example, Clara's going back to John and saying, John, you missed your deadline. Is there something going on with the work? Is there a way that I can be helpful? Right? And then John doesn't have any information to share. He says, I'm just overloaded. I got too many priorities going on. I just can't meet these deadlines. Then maybe there's a next step where the team leader is brought in, and then it's going to the project manager, right? And then it's going to the project sponsor or the steering committee or advisory group or whatever you want. It's not that every single issue is going to be escalated to the very top, right? There's steps that you take based on the severity and the impact of potential risks or issues that you've identified, but you can't ignore them. And if you're managing a project correctly, or if you're on a team where the project is being managed correctly, there's going to be a risk log, there's going to be an issue log, there's going to be escalation protocol in place so that there is a place to put this information so that the proper management of the issues can be done. Be specific and objective. So this is where I like to say avoid ambiguity. Coming to somebody and saying a lot of people have raised concerns. We have missed a lot of deadlines. There's been a lot of noise about X, Y, and Z. What does a lot mean? Because a lot to me might mean something entirely different to you. So when again, this is your role as a team member, when you are communicating issues, when you're communicating risks, when you're communicating concerns, do not use ambiguous terms. Try to use as many facts and data that you can, right? So we've had 3 calls from stakeholders about X, Y, and Z, right? So you say a lot, you now tell me 3. I say, okay, that is something to be concerned about. versus somebody who says there's been a lot and there's one and there's really, 100 stakeholders on a project. That would not be considered a lot to many. So try to avoid those ambiguous terms and try to be as specific as possible so that the necessary action can take place. Understand the protocols, right? So familiarize yourself with the project's defined escalation paths, know who to inform and how, and ensure that your concerns are reaching the right ears at the right time. So you don't want to go to a project sponsor with a concern and then they say to you, did you talk about this with the project manager? Did you talk about this with your team lead? Right? You want to make sure that if you are going to, because it takes courage, if you're going to have the courage to raise issues and concerns, then you want to make sure that you're talking to the right person at the right time. And the last thing that your role is as a team leader is related to being part of the solution and not part of the problem. So when you see that there's issues, when you see that there's risks, give yourself space. Give yourself 24 hours, for example, to think through, okay, this is something that falls within our escalation protocol. This is something that is within the boundaries that have been set, a 10% delta from our schedule, for example. And I need to share this with my team lead. Think about when you share that, what additional information can you offer to mitigate the risk? What additional information can you provide to remove the issue? Right? Be part of the solution, do part of the thinking, because that's where the real progress is going to take place because you've identified the issues, you followed the escalation path, and now you're working to continue to move the project forward. So I just wanted to talk about escalation protocols here quickly. So when you're defining escalation protocols, and this can be, your steering committee can set this up, your advisory committee, project sponsor, your project manager, a team lead, you have your own sphere of control about who you are responsible for. So this escalation protocol could be yours as just a team lead, or if you're a project manager, yours for the entire project. But what you want to do is make sure that you are documenting who to inform and at what severity levels, right? So if I'm a team lead and I'm creating escalation protocols, I'm going to be able to identify here's what we're categorizing issues, right? Maybe I'll just use a basic low, medium, and high issue. Okay, for the low issues, my expectation as a team leader is that you guys work amongst yourselves on the team to resolve. For the medium issues, I suggest that you and I get together, myself as a team leader and you as a team member, and we talk through those. For the high issues, I need you to communicate that to me and I will take that to our project sponsor. Right? So you have escalation guidelines and paths so that folks know what those protocols are and what will be done with that information. Nobody wants to share something and go into a black hole. They actually want to know that, again, because it takes courage, they want to know that they are doing this for the right reason. They're moving the project forward. They want to keep the project on track. And set thresholds, which I just went over, and then communicate those expectations. And we can't manage in chaos, right? So we don't want to wait till there's a major issue and then be able to communicate that back to the team. What we want to do is when we start the project from the beginning, we want to indicate what the escalation protocols are so that everybody's clear when they're thinking clearly about the project, about what those protocols are, not when they're in crisis and then being told for the first time what those escalation protocols are. So the key takeaways here is that when we have individuals who do not feel comfortable reporting issues, there's a reason, right? There's something inside of them that says, I'm not comfortable sharing this information. It's not because they don't see it. It's not because they don't have good instinct. It's not because they're blind to it. It's something internally that's saying, I'm not sure how to handle this situation. And we talked about that at the beginning. It could be internal, like fear of embarrassment, but it could also be organizationally that there's no protocol in place. So, what we have to do as leaders is be able to meet them where they are and create the environment so that it is a safe place to share that information. And again, we can't just do it when the crisis erupts. We have to set the stage from the beginning. So we look for all the things that we can implement. We can implement risk on our agendas. We can do highs and lows of the project. We can do those check-ins. And remember, check-ins are different than status meetings. Check-ins are, hey, Carla, just wanted to check in and see how the project's going. Give employees the opportunity, give your team members the opportunity to find different ways to communicate their concerns with you. So instead of the red, the yellow, and the green, ask for a confidence level of 1 to 10. Ask, how are things going on a scale of 1 to 5? How is the team getting along? Right? People might be more apt to provide an objective measurement than they are to a subjective, because they might, in that subjective analysis, come out with, I'm fine. And we know when people say I'm fine, they're not always fine, and the project isn't always fine. So the warning signs, again, we look for people who are super, super quiet, not asking questions. Conversely, we look for people who have been vocal, who were asking questions, and now there's a random stage of silence that is occurring. We're looking for when there's always green status reporting and everything's always looking good. When we talk about risks, no risks are coming up. These are just some of them. You'll trust your gut and your instinct, and you kind of know, I wonder if something else is really going on and I need to dive a little bit deeper. So you establish those clear status thresholds, create that psychological safety, implement the escalation protocols, and actively reward transparency over perfect looking reports, right? You'd rather get the information that you need to keep the project on track than just getting a green glowing report every time. And when problems surface earlier, they're going to be easier to fix. So the slide we had before about the iceberg, right? They start out really small and then they just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. If we can work on them when they're small, hopefully we can prevent them from getting to be those big iceberg issues. And just remember that green reports with red realities help no one. The more honest we are about our projects, and the more that we show that there might be yellow and red indicators, but they're going to succeed more in the end because we're going to be able to address those problems sooner rather than later. So that's all I have for today. I hope that you found this information useful and some good takeaways for you to take back to work with your teams. Again, you have that sphere of control, so you can implement escalation protocols right within your team, or if you're joining today as a project manager, so that you have information that you can take back for your entire project. I encourage you to follow me on social media, schedule time with me to connect. And if you think that I could benefit your team or your organization, I would love to connect with you as well. I wish you all well, and I hope you found today's session helpful.